welcome. It's our first episode. I'm super excited to be here with these four superheroes. My name is Dr. Jamaal Fortner. Well, I like saying that. It sounds good when you put the doctor in front. I like saying that. Dr. Jamaal Fortner, and I'm out of Houston, Texas. I carry a few different specialties: substance use, domestic violence, race and education, and LGBTQ plus issues. I want to give all of my colleagues an opportunity to introduce themselves. We can just kind of go down the row. I know, with being on Zoom, everybody's in a different order. So I have, in order for me, I have Jason, Crystal, Regina, and Michelle going in that order. So let's go ahead and get these introductions out the way. Y'all go ahead.
Hello, I'm Dr. Jason Lester, and it does feel good to say that. I am in Aurora, Colorado, and my specialty is with regard to child welfare and homeless advocacy. And on a day-to-day basis, I serve as the Director of Family Support Services at the Colorado Coalition for the Homeless. And in my, spare time, I teach at the University of Denver Graduate School of Social Work. Jamaal, thank you for having me. I'm happy to be here.
All right. Whoop, whoop.
Hi, everyone. I'm Dr. Crystal DeBerry, licensed clinical social worker from Memphis, Tennessee. I am the founder of a 501c3 nonprofit, Indomitable Families Affected by Incarceration, and owner of De Novo Clinical Strategies, LLC. I currently teach for 3 universities, the University of Memphis, Ole Miss, as well as Union University, and I'm a mom of 5. Thank you for having me.
Ooh, that's some hard work right there. Come on.
Okay, I am Dr. Regina Parnell. I am currently living in St. Louis, Missouri, but for 25 years I resided in Champaign-Urbana, Illinois, where the University of Illinois is. There, I kind of started my work in child advocacy, social change, race and education, and child and youth development. And I'm excited to be a part of this dynamic team.
Yay! All right. Coming us all the way from St. Louis. All right.
Yes. Good evening. I'm Dr. Michelle Greenidge. I am currently living in Tampa, Florida. I am actually originally from Los Angeles, California, and I am a licensed clinical social worker in the Air Force. I specialize in military social work, trauma work, as well as substance abuse, and I'm super excited to be here.
Yes, around the way girl. She got back to us because she was
G.I. Jane.
She was in the UK and she got back to us safely, and how happy we are.
Yes.
Yes, she did.
So our first episode, I feel like in order to kind of get this particular topic out of the way, because it's in the news so frequently, I want us to talk a little bit about racial trauma. I know everybody has kind of their own definition thereof, but I guess I would start out by saying, let's talk a little bit about what racial trauma is. So y'all can just feel free to just hop right on in.
You know what, Dr. Jamaal, in regards to racial trauma, I'm glad that you decided to ask the first question of what is it? Because I know for me, just being in private practice and working with such a diverse population, it's so interesting how everyone is affected by the Black Lives Matter revolution at this point. It's not just a movement, it's a revolution. And so when we're talking about just the racial, what is it? Because again, I'm hearing it from so many different perspectives. My young Black men, hey, how do I deal with this? Where do I go from here? We're literally talking about safety planning for when we go out. Mm-hmm. And then my population, my clients from other races, it's just a matter of, I do feel this guilt. What do I do with this guilt? How do I continue on day to day knowing that this is really, truly what's happening? And so great question to just say, the racial part. How do we define it?
Definitely. I think oftentimes when we're dealing with trauma, people think of so many things that cause trauma besides race. They'll talk about, did something happen to you in your life? Did you see something happen, or did you witness something? Did you lose someone? But for people of color, specifically for Black people, there is an element of trauma that comes along just from being Black in everyday society. And I feel that oftentimes people try to overlook it or to diminish or derogate the experience of being Black by saying, oh, well, you know, we've had the civil rights movement. We've had a Black president. What are we talking about now? And it's kind of like, well, unless you've walked in my shoes, and unless you've been a Black person, and in my specific case, a Black man in America, it's very difficult to try to verbalize all the time the actual feelings that come along with, this is what I feel when I walk outside. When I walk in my neighborhood that is majority white, I feel like I have to be on pins and needles because I don't want to do anything that's going to lead anyone to think that they have any reason to be suspect of me. You know, whereas I know that my white counterparts don't even think twice about that when they walk out of their front door, you know?
Correct.
So, yeah, all right.
Correct. Mundane, extreme environmental stress.
There you go.
That's exactly what it is.
I gotta say that in my neighborhood, I live in a white neighborhood too. There's a whole bunch of Subarus and yoga pants that just be going up and down the street. And essentially, I find myself, when I want to go outside, I subconsciously put on a USC shirt or put on something safe because I don't want to be considered this Black man in this middle-class neighborhood that doesn't belong. I look at how my son is dressed. I actually think about being Black, being a Black man, more often than I give credit. And the reality is that my son, who's 7 now, and me, who's 37, we have a high likelihood of being pulled over by the police and being murdered and being unarmed. And that is our reality. And for me, the trauma is real because that could really happen. And I just feel that when you look at what's happening all over the world, you have that one guy that flew into Wisconsin and he murdered 2 people. You have that white guy that murdered the people at the church, and they took him to Burger King. But meanwhile, you have these unarmed Black boys that are murdered. And they have to go home. They have to go home and be with the Lord, all because of people being scared to work with them, not being properly trained, and basically fear. So that's the trauma that I have.
And I would go a step further and say that African Americans have had racial trauma since slavery. You know, it has been embedded in us to be inferior of others, you know, to have that low self-esteem, not to feel a sense of hopelessness, have that anxiety about when we are around others that are of other race that we feel lower than what we are. You know, we were taught not to, you know, they have tried to teach us not to look them directly in their eyes, to look below, to show that we are beneath them. But as we stand, as you guys say, that, you know, as a Black mother, I teach my boys to stand strong. You know, look at somebody in their face when you're speaking and have confidence. But, you know, it's like a double-edged sword. So when they confront someone or speak their truth to someone else, will they be harmed? Will they return back home to me? So, you know, it's a double-edged sword for Black mothers.
Yep. And I'll add to that. One of the things that I thought about instantly when you asked that question is having to explain to my 19-year-old son, you know, that when he is walking around, if he happens to get approached by a police officer, don't reach in your pocket. Okay. Right. You know what I mean? Say yes, sir, no, sir, as he normally would anyway. But I have to reiterate these things because he is a Black man in America. And just having that thought to me is beyond me, because while from slavery to now, we've come very, very far. We're still walking on eggshells, right? I was sitting there thinking about going outside with these earrings on, and it says unapologetically Black. You know, I had to think twice about it because going outside in the South means that somebody might actually walk up to me and say something. But you know what? I just said, let them.
Yes.
So, I mean, you know, and one thing I think that we're seeing so much of right now, in particular because of COVID falling right alongside everything else, is have a lot more eyes on things that are happening. So I'm hearing a lot of people like, oh my gosh, I didn't realize this was going on. And at first I was angry about it because I was like, are you really gonna feign this kind of ignorance? Like, I mean, did you just notice that Black people are subjugated in our society? Because I'm like, you missed about 400 years 400 years of history if you are just noticing this. But at the same time, I'm realizing, hey, beforehand, you had people kind of on the go. They were in their own world, where now you have to be home. You have no choice but to be home and on social media or in front of the news, and you're seeing this, and it's just at this point overwhelming because it's almost like, okay, we have all these people recording people being killed. We have, and you know, and I think it's great to shine that spotlight on the people who are doing it. Simultaneously, I always wonder, what is this doing to our psyche as people of color when you're constantly seeing someone that could be you or be your brother or be your sister or what have you being, you know, literally killed by the police for nothing. Especially when it comes down to mental health issues. With people of color and mental health issues, it's like there's already this stigma, and they're saying, oh, well, we need to teach the police not to kill Black people and train them. And I'm like, well, do we have to teach them not to kill white people? Because maybe I missed that. Did I miss that training? The don't kill white people training? But like, I feel like when it comes to Black people, we're always just handled in ways that lack respect or any type of care or just oversee our humanity. And it's not just with the police. I would say even in the medical field. You know, I just read a study about how many Black women are dying from postpartum like illnesses where they said to the doctor, hey, I don't feel good. I'm running a fever. This doesn't feel right. And the doctors just overlook it, you know. And in my life, I remember my sister, after she had my nephew, she kept saying, I'm in pain. And I was like, what's going on? I don't understand. And she said, I don't know. They gave me the pain pump, but it's not working. Literally, she went all night after having a C-section saying that she was in pain. None of the nurses bothered to check until the Black nurse came in, did the check, and was like, something's not right here. And lo and behold, the needle that was supposed to be in her back had come out of her back and was literally on the bed and was essentially just putting pain medicine on the bed. But all night long, she's in pain and nobody bothered to check anything. This is the kind of stuff that really throws me for a loop because it's like, okay, so do we need to be hyper vigilant in every area of our lives? We can't even trust our health providers to take care of us. And I feel like there's a level of cultural competency that is lost just across the board when you're dealing with people of color. And I don't know why that is or what we can do to, you know, hopefully change that along the way.
Well, you know, I remember one of my clients coming to me and was just saying, hey, I am tired of being Black. You know, and she said, I'm working in, you know, a setting where it's dominantly white. She said, I'm always the spokesperson for Black people. She said, I am tired of being Black. She said, I love being Black, but sometimes I do get tired. And again, you know, what I'm just talking about, the mundane, you know, extreme environmental stress disorder. That's just literally, as Black people, every hour on the hour, we are reminded in some way, shape, form, or fashion that we're Black. TV, news, everything. I'm going to say this. Technology has really, truly made the world smaller. But these killings of Black people this is not new. They had whole congregations, whole meetings, picnics, of killing Black people right there. I think what happened is it wasn't put in the news over time. And so people kind of felt like, okay, it's not happening anymore. But now with technology and being able to expose certain things, that's what's making it feel like, okay, it's still happening. When people are saying, oh, it's just really happening now, it's really big. No, it's been happening. This is not anything new.
Yeah, and I would add to that, Dr. DeBerry, that it wasn't, when they were killing us, it wasn't newsworthy because someone of a different color had been killed. We see it so often. When someone else is missing, you can find it on every local station. But when you have an African-American child or a minority child missing, it'll take a couple days to hit the news nationwide. It might hit it locally, but not nationwide. It's not a crisis when it's us. So it isn't anything new. We are born, when we are announced that we're born by our Black mothers, it's a crisis and a trauma to the parents that have given birth to us because they already know the path that we have to walk. Mm-hmm. So it's about training our children, that constant worry. And, society, some people still go on their daily journeys not understanding what we endure because it doesn't impact them. So if it doesn't impact you, then it's not an issue in your life.
Correct. I agree.
That's what I'm going to say. I mean, privilege is the ability to ignore something that, doesn't directly affect you. So, basically, you've heard about Black people getting killed by the police, or you've heard about a child, just getting a lackluster education in a public school setting. Mm-hmm. But until that child lives next door to you, or maybe you happen to go and be on the same soccer team as that child, then is when you start to realize as a white person or a person with privilege that, wow, this is really happening. And I guess I want to say, guess what today is? Today is yet another day that Breonna Taylor's killers haven't been brought to justice. Mm-hmm. I mean, we continue to be marred as these second-class people. And, it just seems like we have to look out for ourselves because no one else is. And there comes a time when you get so fatigued and so tired, you have to explain to people that don't understand your culture what your culture is going through. Mm-hmm. You have to look in the mirror and figure out what are your own feelings about it. You have to be the representative of all Black people in America when you're talking to other people, and it makes you want to lose your hairline again. Now, you see, I ain't got no hair. So all I'm saying is that I'll speak for myself. The Lester family, we went 33 generations in slavery. And, oftentimes you hear people say, well, I didn't own any slaves. But for those 33 generations, we went without education. We went without financial progression. We went without health, you name it. We went without all this stuff. Meanwhile, our white counterparts continue to prosper and prosper and prosper.
Oh, for right back.
What I want to say is that, shout out to the Black people and the Black and brown people that are doing very well, because essentially you are the rose that grew out of concrete.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Mm-hmm. I just want to piggyback off of what Jason just said. Dr. Lester, because it sounds so good. Well, I think it's important to identify that, yes, we do get tired, but we still have to keep doing the work. We can't get so tired that we start slacking and we say we can't do it anymore, or we allow things like depression and anxiety take over and control us. We're going to experience that, and we've been experiencing that for years, right? But we got to keep pushing forward and keep becoming successful. We have to keep this stuff in the news so that we can remind those people that say, I've never seen this before. Well, we got to bring it to the forefront. And I do believe they've never seen it before, because just like Dr. Lester said, it's because of privilege. You know what I mean? You're living in your box. And as long as it doesn't affect you, it's not important. But we have to make it important, not just for our community, but for every other community. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yes, that makes a lot of sense. And I would add, Major, that we have to have leaders. So our foundation, our people have to get out and vote and have a big impact on voting, regardless of who you vote for. Vote for someone that represents our community as a whole. We have our leader who's constantly having divisive messages on Twitter, but yet you have some that look like us supporting him. But at the end of the day, when it happens to our community, you are a part of our community, and there's nothing that can separate you. You know, it reminds me of the civil rights movement when their governor was, he said nothing about the things that were happening to our people before the civil rights movement happened, the lynching of the killings and the Jim Crow laws. He had nothing to say about that. Negatively, he pushed it. But once civil rights movement started, then it was a big uproar with him, that he didn't want that in his state, that people were coming in being divisive, they were being agitators, they were being mobsters as well. So I think he's our president, the current leader's uncle, because they have the same mentality.
I mean, ultimately, one of the things that I think when we're talking about racial trauma, a large part of that I think can be seen in the apathy sometimes that people of color have towards voting, because I feel like a large tool that the majority will use against us is simply going, oh, your vote doesn't matter anyway. And then they implant that ideology in its brain. My vote doesn't matter. It doesn't matter who I vote for. They'll just put in whoever they want in office. And it's kind of that idea of, if you understood fully the history so that we could vote, so that your vote would count as a full unit and a full person. I mean, when you go back 3/5 compromise and then keep going forward to the Fannie Lou Hamers who were marching and being beaten and people being killed, literally, I tell people of color all the time, voting is so important because your vote has blood on it. Your vote was not a given, although it should have been. Although you should have been considered a person and you should have been considered a vote, but that wasn't the case. Somebody had to literally fight and die for you to have the right to go out and cast your vote. So for you to sit at home on election day is so incredibly disrespectful. It's so disrespectful to everyone who's come before you, because these people fought for you. You are their promise. And for you to just throw it away is just, in my mind, so disrespectful. I don't care who you vote for. I don't care if you write a person in. You can write yourself in the line if you want to, but go out and vote because it matters.
Yeah. And not only is it disrespectful to those that came before us, Dr. Jamaal, it's disrespectful to our generations beneath us. Because if we as parents don't protect our generations that from here on out, then what good are we? How can we change? We talk about what government is not doing for us, but how can we change government when we won't even go out and do for ourselves? It only takes 5 minutes to vote. Yes, you might have to stand in line. Yes, it might be raining. Yes, COVID might have happened. Protect yourself, put your mask on, get you some gloves, and get out and vote.
Dr. Parnell, I'm a piggyback off of that, because I was one of those who did not vote for a while. In my early 20s, 18 to early 20s, I did not vote. I used to walk around and say, Jesus is my president. It didn't matter who was in office. Jesus at the end of the day is my president. The people in office could not touch me. But I surely learned. And you brought up a good point in that if I don't vote for myself, I at least need to do it for my children. Because not only do I have a Black son, I have a Black son with autism. And just being a clinician, we know that they can easily appear, some of them, as rude or disrespectful. And it's really a matter of, if the police don't understand Black people, they definitely not going to understand symptoms of autism.
Correct.
So if I don't vote for anything else, I'm definitely in these streets voting for who I feel is the best candidate for us, who sees us as a culture, who understands, certain issues that other people will never understand. So I was one of those who was quickly reformed. and see, hey, it's important. And in just seeing that, and seeing this thing on Facebook where I am my ancestors' wildest dream. Oh my gosh, if that does not stick with me, For all of us right now to have doctor whatever afterwards is definitely a blessing. And when we're talking about racial trauma, this is generations upon generations upon generations of just continual stuff. This stuff is not new. Being medical experiments, especially for Black women, those experiments to see how much pain we can take. That's why they're not giving us medication, because they feel like we're really, truly superheroes.
Yeah.
Going back to the whole voting piece, I got to say that, to be honest with you, there have been times where an election has happened or an election is about to happen, and I feel as though neither side truly has my back. I think that people will come to I went to an HBCU, they'll come to my college and they'll, have this big to-do and have these great, hopeful speeches filled with hope, and then they leave and they never come back.
Right.
They never send those monies to the schools. They never follow through on any of their campaign promises. So I guess I agree. We have to vote, and also we need to keep our foot on the gas. Hold these people accountable, because it's so frustrating to work, live here in Colorado and see how our unhoused community members are treated with the sweeps, where they're throwing their things away in the trash can, where and Dr. DeBerry, you brought up autism. I'm an autism dad too. And I think that just the other day, I was at my son's psychological evaluation, and this had to be the most woke white lady I'd ever met in my life. I mean, she literally had Black Lives Matter on her car, so it wasn't no game, no joke. And I was like, she said, well, here's the evaluation, Dr. Lester. And also, I want you to know that as your son gets older, it will behoove you to get a location device for your son, because him being a Black man in America, they, like you said, Dr. DeBerry, the police and other authority figures may not know how to work with him. And essentially, he could turn up dead. To hear that as a 37-year-old Black man, it scared me. Because right now we have over here in Colorado, we have Elijah McClain, another young Black man that was murdered unarmed, and all he was trying to do is get a soda pop for his brother, and he played the violin for felines. I mean, so all I'm saying is that the vote is very important, and just as soon as we get these people in office, we have to ensure that they have our interests at heart.
So it's not just presidential elections, it's local elections, because the local elections impact our youth. I mean, it impacts the way laws are presented when my son get arrested or someone of privilege get arrested. So it plays. So we have to hold everyone responsible, the state's attorneys, the public defenders, because they get in office and they don't represent us to the best of their abilities. So we have to fight locally, statewide, federal, not just federal. We have to remember things that's going on in our communities. With COVID impact, some local mayors are doing what they need to do to protect their community, but then you have some that want to act like it's not an option. It is an option. We have to support each other.
I think, one of the big issues with voting is when we're talking about racial trauma and the effects thereof, I think one of the coping mechanisms is doing things like voting. It is doing anything that you can to empower yourself and make sure that your voice is heard. You're moving away from that sense of helplessness, which is where we've been for 400 to 600 years, and moving into the place of, where does my power lie? My power lies in my vote. So let me get out and vote. I'm going to use my voice and encourage other people to vote, that kind of thing. And when I say vote, I mean, I know a lot of people just think president, but as y'all said, I mean, from the top down to the bottom, I don't care if it's the local dog catcher they voting for, I'm voting on it. I'm voting on it. I want making sure that all the dogs are treated equally, whether they be brown dogs or black dogs or white dogs. I want to make sure they all treated equally. Don't put all the pit bulls down. I don't like the pit bulls being put down like that. Things like whatever it is. I say get out and vote and make sure that your voice is heard. I mean, as we were talking about the different instances of things happening, my mind went to an instance where a lady called me. She's a friend of a friend, and she gave me a call and asked me about some advice for what to do for her brother because he had mental health issues. And she said, he might be on drugs, but we don't know, and we really want to get him help. And as I was explaining to her her options, and I remember I said, well, you could call the police. And then I said, but, and right after I said it, I felt myself getting like super anxious, super elevated. And I was like, if you're going to call the police, let that be your very last resort. And if that's your last resort, when you call them, explicitly let them know he has a mental health issue. You guys need to send out somebody who is on a psychiatric response team. Do not send out, Joe Blow, who barely got out of high school and knew somebody at the police academy. Send someone out there who understands that there is a psych issue. I'm very pleased now that a lot of local police departments are adding more social workers to their departments and are adding more psych people to their department, because the fact of the matter is we're seeing so many instances now of people with mental health issues. And I mean, that's going to be a topic for another video, but for African Americans, we've had such a long history of just trying to normalize everything. We just want our kids to be normal and to fit in. So we don't acknowledge that there is a mental health issue. We know that something's off. We know that something's not quite right, but instead of us getting them help, we would instead rather go, well, I'm going to just pray about him, pray over him, and just let him go out in the streets. Don't just pray over him and let him go out in the streets. That's not safe.
Right.
The streets are not safe.
Exactly. I'm happy that you know Jesus, but the person that's going to shoot him in the back with the badge on,
not know Jesus.
They don't know Jesus. So let's be mindful. If they need help, get them help. But I just remember my anxiety rising as I was telling her, and I'm like, please, 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 like, let that be your last option. If it means, calling a alarm line or anything, just call anybody. Like, in my mind, I was like, please call anybody. You believe, call the pastor. See if the pastor will come out and ride with you and go to the drug house, wherever he may be, and pull him out of there. But please don't call the police unless it is an absolute last resort. And I hate that we as a people feel that way. I hate that because it's not every police officer who's a bad guy. There are good police officers out there. There are good doctors and there are good nurses out there who work tirelessly and they don't care about what color the person is. But for every, great, amazing nurse, you have somebody who should have never been allowed to be a nurse or a doctor or a police officer. And it's unfortunate, but it is the truth of our existence. And
I would add, and I have one of my good friends is the chief of police within the community that I lived in. And so he and I oftentimes have conversations about police and community relationships. So you're right. There are people in power that are good people, and then you have those bad apples. And I would go beyond and say not just police officers, nurses, and doctors, but you have some social workers that are not stable within themselves, that work closely with our families. So us as clinicians, we have to call out. And not only do we have to call out, if you're in a profession that you have a bad apple in your profession, you have to call that out. You have to make that known, because it's only putting a dark light on your profession in your environment or your community. So, I see it all the times. I work with, I have interactions with some caseworkers who feel that, a parent is not doing what they need to do for a child. But until you walk somebody's walk, who are you to judge? You're there to provide services. You're there to provide support. You're there to provide the guidance. You're not there to judge and put what you thought and your values into somebody else's life situations.
But I think it just comes down to cultural competency. In social work, right? The NASW, cultural competency for us is a must. But in all other disciplines, is cultural competency listed as such? So I think that's a big barrier too. Do we really know the people that we're serving when it comes to the different cultures of it, and how for a lot of clinicians, I tell my students, you are not treating a client's skin color. Don't do that. Don't look at someone and say, oh my gosh, they're black. Uh-oh, here we go. No, we're not doing that. Make sure you are looking at that person in their environment before you start judging and assessing, because a lot of times people don't like to admit this, but sometimes when we're assessing, there's stereotypes and biases in it as well. Let's eliminate that. What do we know culturally just about our client? What are their strengths? What are their weaknesses? And just look at them as an individual, the person in the environment, right? Instead of just trying to go off of the news and what you see every day. No, go to workshops, go to conferences, even if you are the only other person in there, right? It's okay to know about the different and the diverse populations that you serve. Don't sit here and act like you do know how to treat a Black person if you've never been to a workshop or a conference on what Black people actually go through.
Mm-hmm.
True.
Exactly.
It's so hard to find people to do these jobs, to be honest with you, though, because I recall trying to find a caseworker that I felt would have the cultural competency and understand power, privilege, and oppression. And, that search was futile. I couldn't really find anyone. And then you have to educate people and get them to hopefully get just to your standard or above. And I'm not going to sit here and act like there's not an overrepresentation of Black and brown children in out-of-home care. I'm not going to sit here and act like there's not an overrepresentation of people that are Black and brown that happen to have their rights terminated quicker. And so, we talked about the police officers, we talked about the nurses, we talked about the doctors, but I guess we should probably look in the mirror at ourselves as social workers, like you said, Dr. Parnell, and basically everybody that applies to the application should not get an interview. And everybody, basically, I think, I don't know if it was Dr. DeBerry or Dr. I don't know, it was one of y'all. One of y'all said that, it's our duty to hold people accountable. So shame on us if we don't speak up when we see something that's foul. Now, I know all four of you, including myself, and I know that we don't have this problem, but I know that people that are listening are probably, feeling a little nervous. I want to encourage them to speak up. And I mean, because once we speak up, then it's when change happens.
Yes. Mm-hmm. I want to use the chain of command. Speak to your colleague first and talk to them about what you see and things that they can do better, and have an honest dialogue, and leave it at a no blaming, no shaming dialogue. Have an open, free discussion. Maybe they don't see it, but bringing it to their attention might help them. Then if that doesn't help, then you go to your supervisor, but put it in writing so it can be known that it's been told. Because if we don't speak up for each other, who's going to speak up for us? We have to break the chain of some of these societies and some of these rules and regulations that's going on. We are here to do that. We're standing on the shoulders of the Fannie Lou Hamers, the Ella Bakers, the Dorothy Heights, and all the other great women and men that's come before us. We have to make that stand.
Let me give Dr. Greenidge a chance to share something, because I just know in my spirit that she wanted to say something. And you cut her off, and I don't want us to run out of time before she gets a chance to say what she wants to say.
Well, what I was going to say was, when we talk about racial trauma, it leads to the anger that we're seeing, and that's being exhibited. Now, as social workers, I want to bring up a point. When we talk about racial trauma and anger, is it okay to exert your anger in the way that we're seeing right now, right? I think that's a huge question, because on the one hand, we all understand why we're angry, and we feel right. We feel like we should be angry, right? The other piece to that, though, is where does that lead? It's all in our approach. It's all in what we choose to do with that anger. Now, we can go out and we can have these riots, but who's listening? You know what I mean? Right. And I'm not going to knock anybody's cause, right? We need to do something, right? But we also need to be thoughtful about the audience and how we get them to listen and hear us. Correct. Right? And so I don't claim to be Dr. Martin Luther King, but I'm team Dr. Martin Luther King.
And I concur. I think that's an awesome point to make. Actually, when we're talking about how we're coping with this racial trauma, one of the things is you always want to make sure that you're coping in a way that's going to be productive. Yes, I understand the looting, the riots, the violence. Of course, that's the voice of the oppressed. That is the language of the oppressed. But at the same time, make sure that you're not doing something that you're going to be the one to pay for. Because the looting and the riots, this is going to have to be paid for by somebody. And guess what? That's just going to be redispersed to the taxpayers, which are the very people who blew everything up in the first place. So it's kind of that idea of be mindful of what you're doing. Be mindful of the way you're choosing to let your outrage and your displeasure be known. And like, as you mentioned, it's not to, again, denigrate or deride anyone's life experience, but you have to understand it is a concerted, well thought out effort that gets the results that you're looking for. Not going blow something up, not flipping the police car over, not looting the Coach and Gucci store. Because at the end of the day, it just makes us look bad. I'm not even gonna tell you a lie. And honest to goodness, when you see the people running out of those stores, although the news seems to always show one Black person, it is usually not us doing that. But to let the narrative that they're spinning be told is to say, oh, well, it's nothing but Black people looting the Gucci store. Well, I don't see us wearing it. Like, so clearly it wasn't all of us. It wasn't us, because we're not wearing it if we did take it. But I'm going to wrap up this first installment right here. Thank you all so much. I'm having a ball, and I just cannot wait for the next episode. So thank you all for tuning in, and we're going to see y'all again in episode 2. Hang around, because we got some good stuff coming. I'm telling you, this tea is about to get hotter and hotter as we go along. So stay with us, and we're going to be back for episode 2 next week.
All right, too.